What lurks beneath the surface of Saskatchewan? Ever wonder what is in the earth? Most would think of the worms and bugs that crawl around in the soil. Others would think of the many dead, man or not, that took their last breath before becoming part of the earth again. Some would imagine the burrows made by animals like rabbits or badgers to provide shelter. A few would think of the hot rock deep below, ever so churning. For me, the earth below us is a place for something else entirely. I shudder to remember all of my experience, but I had to so that it is out there as a warning to others if they were to experience a similar situation. For most of my life, I have lived in a hamlet in Saskatchewan. I will not tell its name as I do not want anyone to experience what I had experienced, but I will try to put context so that it makes sense to anyone who would be in a similar situation to mine. The hamlet was at one time a town, relying on the railway to provide for its residents and businesses. It was that way until a fire in the early 1920s that destroyed half the town. I do not know how many people died in the fire, however, what is known is that the hamlet never got to its former glory. The only people who lived there were either the religious Mennonites or people who wanted a simpler life. I was part of those who wanted a simpler life, of which I grew up here since I was still an infant since my parents moved from the city of Saskatoon. While I do have a few fond memories, all that I did is do chores and watch TV, while also going to school in another town a few miles from here. We don't farm, unlike those outside of the hamlet. We are more like one of those people whose parents had worked somewhere else. Overall, in this hamlet, almost everyone knew who everybody was, except for me. During my free time, I would read a few nonfiction books and draw maps that would pop out in my antisocial teenage head. In summer, I would go outside and explore the natural world and the hamlet itself. The weird thing I should mention is that our house is the only one of two surviving structures that survived the fire, which is an achievement in itself. The other is an abandoned brick 3-story schoolhouse a block away to the south. It is built in the mid-1910s and abandoned sometime in the 70s, maybe because of a lack of funding to keep operations going. It was bought out by many owners, people like us, but wanted their life to be a little more grandiose, but every time, they would either move out or disappear without a trace. We always assumed the ones gone likely moved out without any of us knowing. I was no different. I used to think that the reason they moved out is because it is difficult to maintain, at least cost-wise. I have heard that water, heating, and plumbing are the main problems, at least what I thought. I would occasionally hear, at least, the bells going off from the schoolhouse, most times when it was supposedly unoccupied. I thought it was the Mennonite kids sneaking into the building to cause a bit of grief upon the town. How wrong I was. It all began during a snowstorm, of which I was sleeping in my bedroom. It was very cold, as we had been struggling with water heating at the time, so I tried to stay warm using hand warmers, which I am not supposed to use under this circumstance, but there is really no other way. I was in a shallow sleep until I heard something amongst the howls of the wind. At first, I thought it was just the wind until I strained my ears to listen closer. I could recognize a scream, not the one you would find in horror movies when someone is being killed, but rather an animal in agony, like a cow or something. Usually, if this was the case, coyotes would be yapping around, attacking the animal and sound off their victory cries. Instead, there was nothing else other than those sounds and the near-deafening wind. I think it lasted for a few minutes before it stopped. The next morning, there was no school, but that was the least of my concerns. One of our farmer friends, Bob, called my mother to say he was missing a few cattle from his pasture, which is on the other side of my house, across the gravel road. He did come over and asked us, along with our buddies, to try and look for the cattle, dead or not. The fresh snow, however, would make this task difficult as the remains of the cattle would be buried in the big snow drifts formed from last night. Eventually, we did find one of the cattle. The dead cow itself was found in one of those islands of trees that pop along the emptiness of the snowy plains, protected from the wind so snow does not accumulate much. The mere sight of it made me feel so weak I wanted to just fall, and, as far as I could recall, one or two of the others fell sick once they saw the sight of the carnage. The thing that bothers me about the snow-covered carcass is that it looked so unrecognizable that you would think that it was a long-abandoned deer carcass, with flesh being ripped from the bones and a leg a far distance away. The only way Bob could have known that it was one of his cows was a tag, still attached to the head that is a good distance away from the body. When we found it, it was positioned perfectly on a stump, as if somebody placed it on the stump to relay some strange warning. It also seemingly had its eyes gouged out and tongue ripped out, like the head that was violently torn from the body. We were disturbed by the sight of such ruin. We assumed only a poacher could do this. The sight left us with many questions, and any known evidence we could have found would be buried in snow, and we still have a few missing cattle to find. Bob reported to the police, which they arrived there a while later. Even they were baffled by the sight of it when it led to it, but they chalked it up to some wild animal attack, explaining a bear could do this. Bob wasn't happy with the explanation, pointing to the perfectly placed head on the stump as a counterpoint that a poacher killed the cow rather than some bear. Either way, the police did warn us to look out for any dangerous animals in the area, and Bob cleaned up the remains. Me and my mother returned home only to talk about the sight we saw. I did not sleep well after that. I always felt watched while I slept, as if there was a presence looking at me through the window. Every time I looked, there was nothing there at the window. At the same time, I would also hear sounds coming from the roof of our house, but I chalked it up to be the few feral cats that usually climb the trees and live on the roof. Over the next few days, I noticed a decreasing number of cats. At first, I wouldn't notice since we usually feed the cats outdoors, and any cats missing would reappear. It seems those we do not see stay unseen. We worry something might be happening to them, like a pack of coyotes or even someone feeding them windshield fluid, but we do not see the bodies. I counted at least 6 of them gone, likely more. That was until 5 days after the cow killing when something came up. In between our house and the schoolhouse is the villa, or a place where the old go to be taken care of. The reason for the villa to be there is, at least what I thought, simply down to the fact the elders wanted a simpler life, like the rest of us, Mennonite or not, for the rest of their days. Today, however, things are getting more complicated than anyone could handle. As far as I heard, on that morning, one of the people there walked down the driveway at the villa and saw something right around the tree. He went closer and realized that there are objects around the tree within the red-stained snow. The man noticed something terribly wrong with what he is seeing. What he was seeing is 7 poorly severed heads of cats within blood-stained snow, and he looked up to see their torn bodies hanging in the bare tree branches. He turned to call out the others on this grisly spectacle, and more people surrounded the tree. Even the neighboring Mennonites went to see the sight, only to recoil at the mere sight of it. The police eventually arrived, and this time they cleaned up the scene, leaving behind a tree surrounded by blood-stained snow. This was told to me by Barney, one of our neighbors who went to the scene. He stated that he thinks somebody is killing the animals for the fun of it, while also thinking this is somehow connected to the missing cows. I was struggling to comprehend who or what is doing this or the actual reason behind this. I went outside to look at the blood-soaked snow that moats around the tree. As I looked from the entrance to the villa, I started to think the cats weren't killed by the tree, as there was seemingly no sign of a struggle in the snow. It looked like the cats were placed there, as there were no splashes around the pool. I tried to look for tracks, but what would be left of it seems to be trampled by the many footsteps of those who visited. As I was walking back to my house, I heard someone yell out something from a distance away. I turned to see a middle-aged man, dressed in jeans and a plaid button shirt with a coat, walking sternly towards me in the road. I recognized as one of the neighbors, but he looked like he was mad or something. I was looking on in a confused stance as he walked up to me, grabbed me by my sweater, and angrily told something in his angry twang that the devil has come to town. I was held up for a few seconds until Bob broke it up and argued with the guy. Eventually, he walked away and Bob assured me everything is going to be okay. That is not where it ends. Strange remains of animals are still being reported, and each more bizarre. In another area nearby, at another of those tree islands, somebody found a site of a pile of dismembered coyote corpses. To the north, there was also a report of 3 dead horses whose bodies are torn up. The heads were missing until they were found nearby in a triangle configuration, disturbing those who saw the sight. Ever since that, more animals in the area disappeared. It even got so bad people won't let their pets alone in fear they may go missing. Police began to think that a few sick individuals are involved. However, the only proof is the crime done. By this point, no one knew who the suspects are. That was until one night. When I was trying to sleep in my room, I heard a tapping through the window that is facing towards the pasture. I thought it was a branch tapping on the window, so I looked up. At first, I confirmed by belief that it was a branch. That was, until it moved in a way a branch wouldn't, and what seems to be more of those branches appeared. The branches are fingers. Fingers long and emaciated, ending in long claws. The fingers followed up to a hand that looked almost human. Imagine holding out your hand and try to make your index finger do the same function as the thumb. The only way to do that is to put the index finger nearer to the thumb itself. That is the hand I saw. The size of the palm took roughly less than a quarter of the 2-foot by 2-foot window. As the hand reached down, I could see it was connected to an arm that is in similar condition to the fingers. After a few moments, the hand suddenly shot up in a split second and the banging of the roof began, only to last a mere few seconds. After that, my mother rushed down the stairs to shut the door open, asking if I was okay. By this point, I was frozen in place in shock. She asked if I heard the noises from the roof. All I could muster is a nod. The next day, I evaluated my experience and asked my mother what it was she heard, knowing the answer. Instead, she explained to me that, when she was trying to sleep in her room upstairs, when she looked through her window, she swore she saw an eye. It wasn't human, but rather like a goat's, and what was its hairless face taking over half of her similarly sized window. She stayed still for a few moments until it seemed to see light coming from the north and was gone in a split second. During this movement, she thought she caught sight of its bunny-like ears, and the noises began but gone as they began. I then told her about my experience, and we were in agreement that we saw the same creature. We also agreed to not tell anyone about the experience, as telling anyone this seemingly ridiculous story would make us look crazy. The animal disappearances continued but declined a little, maybe because more people are keeping their pets inside. Eventually, they stopped once spring came along, and we all thought it was the end of it. People are letting their dogs and cats out, not giving a worry about them. The farmers no longer had to monitor the cattle, as not only they had to worry about the events happening, but there were less predators at the time. There was a period of relief until it got worse. It happened sometime in the late part of spring. As far as I heard, one of our farmer friends, Nathan, came over to another of his buddies' place, Howard. Both lived nearby. He knocked on the door of the house, expecting a welcome from him as usual. Instead, there is no answer at the door. He kept knocking, assuming he was asleep or something. He eventually called him and heard his phone from inside. He was hoping for a response. There was none. Nathan became concerned, assumed that he had a heart attack or he was dead, so he tried to find a way in. He looked around the house, crowbar in hand, trying to look for a window low enough to open. He found none, so he got through the door and went in. As he walked up the stairs and into the first floor, he saw there was nothing wrong. Everything seems to be in place until he went to the bedroom where Howard is supposed to be. When he opened the door, the place was a mess. Bed sheets were everywhere, drawers have fallen down, broken glass, and, oddly enough, the bed that is upside down near a broken window. He could see the phone near the bed, broken but working. He called the police to report this, and they did an investigation once they arrived. That is at least what I was told. Either way, Howard was missing. Howard wasn't the only one missing, however. He was the start of a series of odd disappearances that continue all the way through summer. It ranges from the usual, like a hiker going missing, to the bizarre, an entire family disappearing from a home without any reason. I think I counted at least 15 missing throughout. What makes this more unusual is the supposed perpetrators seem to never leave a trace other than the damage they leave behind, from broken windows to smashed-in doors. The police were confused, trying to find every suspect possible. To some, it seems like the same people who killed the cats and took their pets are starting to take the people. Others find it really unexplainable and scary, so they took the effort to not go alone outside at night, fearing they may become missing. It went so far as to hunting parties looking for the group responsible, and, still, they happened. Animals began disappearing again, albeit at a lesser rate. People still kept their pets inside, and farmers began to monitor their cattle again. It was a risky time. Nothing is safe once the sun goes down. All that was my summer break was staying inside most of the time, playing games with my mother and drawing fictionalized maps. I then remembered the night that I saw the hand, and I at least thought it was connected to the disappearances. I then looked on the internet for anything that described the creature. The closest thing I found to the description of this thing is the Wendigo, who you all know, with the Skinwalker a close second. Wendigo, however, are still somewhat human and don't have bunny ears, nor does a Skinwalker turn into a hairless abomination we saw on that night. I looked harder, finding no luck on it, until I found something unexpected. I can't remember the site, but it had to do something with Cree legends in the area, of which included the Wendigo, just under Wetiko. What I read was different from the story of the Wendigo. It had to do with the mythology of the moon rabbit, who wished to ride it one day and asked Crane to take him to the moon. Along the way, his hand is somehow bleeding and marked it on Crane's head, explaining the red mark on every Crane's head today. What it did not tell, at least according to the site, is that the moon rabbit had a brother. As the story goes, they wanted to ride the moon together and they asked Crane to carry them up there, but Crane could only carry one at the time. The moon rabbit was being carried by Crane when his brother jumped and tried to grab upon his paws, only to scratch them and fall back down. Stuck on the ground, he could only watch as his sibling went up towards the moon. The winter air came and he went into his burrow to sleep. He woke up early, figuring the snow would be gone. The snow is gone, but the plants haven't turned green, so he tried to start a fire. The fire then spread, forcing him into his burrow and waiting until it died itself off. When he came out, there was no food in sight, and so he starved, thinning each day and losing his hair. One day, a deer arrived and, in sheer desperation, killed the deer to savor his hunger. On and on, every animal he saw he killed and ate, but he wasn't satisfied. Even when the grass returned, he was still accustomed to eating the flesh of others, only hunting at night to see his brother, riding the moon and hoping to come. Men then arrived and, unlike him, only killed when they needed to. The hungry rabbit contorted himself to be more man-like to be with man, only for them to be revolted by its horrific stature. Angry, he killed the whole tribe and ate them. The other tribes, hearing of this, descended upon the land he resided, burning the land so there was nothing for him. This did not stop it, going as far to kill the tribes who set fire to its land. The tribes who remained were forced to offer their own to satisfy the beast. Wesekchak, trickster hero to the Cree, saw this and thought out a plan to stop it. One night, while the beast was hunting, he turned into the moon rabbit and spoke to him. Surprised, the hungry thing told him how sorry he was for scratching his paw and asked him if he could go to the moon with him. Wesekchak, in the moon rabbit form, told him he couldn't go as he killed others to only satisfy himself. The beast then noticed that he did not have any scratches on his paw, so it called out Wesekchak and chased him, falling into his own burrow in the process. The other tribesmen then put a heavy rock over the burrow, trapping it. It is unknown whether the beast starved to death or was just sleeping, but one thing is certain, the rock should remain sealed. Now, I do not know if this was a real Cree myth, as other websites never mention this mythology, but it shares some similarities with the creature I saw. The contorted human-like rabbit